Well, it's the 2nd of February, and yesterday was St. Brigid's Day, and next Monday we have a bank holiday. So this weekend is now the St. Brigid bank holiday. In some sense, it's the coming of spring, but it's also farewell to winter. I couldn't resist recording this one. The lights went out on Nullag Naman. The relentless flow of television news and soap opera came to a standstill. I was in a lovely big dark kitchen like a cave, with candlelight and whiskey on the table, and 3 old women around the solid fuel range, and their old men at the table talking of rushes and horses and shooting ducks in the morning. The electricity was off for hours. The women were silent, and their busy hands were still at last. And in the candlelight their youth returned, their eyes sparkled, and their skin glowed with heat like a forest of lanterns. "There's rushes in the field beyond the river," a man said, near the forestry. "Rushes in Westmeath," another exclaimed. "That's a disgrace." "It comes in the cattle hooves," the third fella explained. "The cattle carry the rushes from Leitrim when they're brought in." "Isn't that a terror?" one of the women said, wiping her brow. "We don't know our own bodies." The clock ticked in the shadows, and we sat so long by candlelight that eventually the faces around me were transformed. The men dissolved into ghosts, but the women grew more beautiful in the flickering light, in the shape of old stories and stories told and shards of love remembered. And whenever death was mentioned, it was with bleak and comic relief. "There was a lady buried in Kinnegad," the woman of the house said, "and she was very rich, and she had a diamond ring on her finger when they took her away in the vault. Later that night, one of the servants broke into the vault and then into the coffin, but couldn't get the ring off her finger, so he got a knife to do the job, and as the blade was going through the bone, the old lady woke up." They asked me, did I ever see a dead person? I smiled and I said, too many. I recalled a woman in Fermanagh who lived alone with lots of cats. I used to see her at first light, standing in the porch of the shop across the street from the bungalow, waiting for hours until the shop opened. One day I went over and asked the shopkeeper who the early customer might be. He told me that the old woman had no clock and she lived alone. "All she ever buys is tins of cat food," he said. Months later, the cat woman went missing, and a flotilla of small boats was launched to search for her on the waters of the Erne. I was in the boat that found her face down beneath the bridge at Trasna Island. I was working as a local curate, and so it was the first of numerous encounters I had with death along the shores of that beautiful river, closing coffins, touching dead faces, shoveling clay into open graves, and trying to say comforting things to the broken-hearted. When I opened the front door of a house and gazed at the mourners in black suits and dresses, with red-rimmed eyes marooned in the blue fog of tobacco smoke, I would summon up archaic words about God's will, though the words were so cliched that they stuck in my throat. And apart from duties that brought me close to the dead, there was little else to do. I had a glass house full of tomatoes and a garden of roses which I inherited from the previous curate, and I too had a cat that gave birth the 4 kittens in a box beside the washing machine in the utility room. I was completely alone and had little interest in either tomatoes or roses, so even they began to wither. And roses got black spot and the tomatoes were drenched with green fly by the end of the summer. When I was finished telling this story, the woman at the house gazed at me as if she was seeing me for the very first time. The hour was late and the whiskey almost finished. The whispering voices and flickering candles had brought the dead in close. But suddenly the electricity returned. The women were disappointed and called for the lights to be turned off again, but the men would have none of it. They rose to their feet like uneasy heroes, in overcoats and mud boots, clutching their lamps. They were ready for the dawn, for ducks and the real world. God, when I look back on it now, there was a line in it that I just stopped at, where somebody said, one of the women said, we don't know our own bodies. And it struck me when I was reading it too that, in the darkness, you think in the darkness you wouldn't see your body. But the funny thing is, in the darkness you really do feel your body. And in that sense you see your body. You see your body with the inner eye. And it struck me also when reading it that it was funny how at the end of the night the women wanted to turn off the light again because the conversation was bringing them into a mysterious world, like a mysterious world where there's ghosts, but also a mysterious world where they know their own bodies. So it's like what somebody said one time, when you go within, you wake up. When you look out, you're sleeping. I think it was Jung or somebody close to him said it. When you look out, you're sleeping, you're dreaming. When you look in, you wake up. And the women in that moment, when the lights came on, they wanted to turn the lights off again and live by the light of the fire, because in the light of the fire they had this lovely sense of ghosts and spirits, and in that sense they were knowing their own bodies. They were using the inner eye. And I think everything we do in meditation is like that. Like in any meditation, in any prayerful realm, you're allowing the possibility of ghosts, really. You're allowing the possibility that there's something underneath the surface. I'll read you one more, but what I'm really coming to is, I suppose, a sense of like, what is faith? And one of the places I found faith was among travellers. I know that sounds crazy, but for me that was the reality. And the other thing I found among travellers was storytelling. That they could embody a story in a powerful way, and they could also embody faith. I was doing a play one time called The Tinker's Curse, and I was playing a travelling man, a one-man show, and I'm a traveller man, and I had a pair of rosary beads, and this was for the drama, and at one stage I flung the rosary beads on the ground in anger. And we used to do the show for groups of travellers, like as private showing, to get their opinions, to see what they thought of it, so that we could, develop it and change it. And I always remember a day a fellow saying to me, a travelling man, he was in the audience and we were having the discussion afterwards, and he says, you shouldn't throw down the rosary beads. He said, no travelling man would do that. Do you know the way he was right and he was wrong? He was wrong in the sense that I'd put it better that there's loads of travelling men might do that. But in their hearts they wouldn't. If their hearts were in the right place, they wouldn't. There's an intrinsic connection between, if you like, the physicality that expresses the sacred and the sacred itself. There's an intense sense of real presence, embodied, physically. You get it in relation to holy wells, and you get it in relation to Crowpatrick. When travellers do patterns, they do a pilgrimage to Crowpatrick, the physicality of it and the numinous or imaginal or sacred realm of it, there's no difference. There's not a hair's breadth between the two. One is the other. Their sense of embodiment is absolutely powerful and amazing, and I have often, in the old days, been in a trailer with a wonderful person, and they might bless themselves, or they might make a sign of a cross, and I'd feel it like a heat, like their energy physically embodying the prayer is synonymous with the reality. They haven't reduced the prayer just to the head. That's my bell. In the old days, like, you hear the bell, now that's 12 o'clock. And everybody, if you were in a Christian Catholic country, sort of you'd bless yourself. Sometimes I bless myself the opposite way. I go 1, 2, and then from right to left. That's the way Orthodox people do it. So I do it that way sometimes, to express my orthodoxy. But what I'm saying to you is that I would see a traveller, Father would say the angel of and you'd say the angel of the Lord declared unto Mary, and she conceived of the Holy Ghost. So you'd say the prayer, but I see maybe as a traveller, I'm sitting in the trailer, and she's a devout religious woman, and we're talking about Padre Pio, and the 12 o'clock bell signals, and she blesses herself. And there's something in the way she does it that I feel the prayer is being completed. So there is an embodiment. She's looking at me, she's looking at the trailer, but she's deeply seeing with the inner eye, and it's physical, it's sensual. And that's what I like about Orthodox tradition, that in the Orthodox Church, there's a huge amount of physicality. There's, people kiss the icon, they bow down before the icon, they light candles. There's so much of prayerfulness is physical. And what I love about Irish tradition, the early Irish tradition in Christianity, is that you get the same stuff. I went to Lough Derg when I was young. I went 3 times between the ages of 18 and 25. And you go on that island and you're barefoot and you're walking around in circles. And when you get there first and you're about 19 years of age, you think it's a completely idiotic thing to be at. Completely stupid. But you get into it because your body gets into it. Your body is forced into it because you've come to do the pilgrimage and you're not going to resist it. So there you are, kneeling on the edge of these stone walls, looking at a crucifix in the middle, a cross, and you're saying your, whatever it is, 3 Hail Marys and 3 Our Fathers. You're pattering away, like mumbling away these prayers, but it's not the meaning of the prayer that matters anymore. It's like you're saying, have I done 1 or 2 or 3? And you have to go round 7 times saying stuff. Outside the wall, It's a circular wall. You go around outside, then you kneel on the wall, and then you go around inside, and then you kneel inside. And that's one station, and then you have to do another 6 stations. And then there's bits of it where you have to go up to the wall of the church and put your back to the wall of the church and stretch out your hands and say, I renounce what? The world, the flesh and the devil. And you're about 19 and you're kind of laughing to yourself. And then you do it on the 2nd round and the 3rd round. You've pushed yourself beyond what the words mean. And it's like you're in a dance. It's like you're in some sort of Pina Bausch dance. I renounce the world, the flesh and the devil. And there's some way that you're embodying something, you know. And I'll come back to the subject of the travellers, because let me read this one for you. There's more to Mullingar than just luxury apartments or clusters of stand-alone mansions in red brick with wrought iron gates which rise behind beech trees in the suburbs. There are back streets and laneways and littered alleys and grey walls and derelict houses. Rows of small cottages with white plastic doors and PVC windows awkwardly cemented into 1950s pebble dash facades. The travellers' halting site in Mullingar is squashed into low land between a graveyard and a main road. I've seen children amusing themselves by flinging bottles of water at each other and drenching their clothes. They exist in a limbo of unease between the screech of cars and the silence of the dead. One Saturday long ago, I was standing at a zebra crossing in a poor neighbourhood when the lights forced a long-axle silver jeep to stop. Stuck on red, it looked like a spaceship flung down onto the wrong moon. In the back seat, a little girl gazed out at me. She had blonde hair and a cream waxy face, lavished with makeup. Her anorak was furry and her face was without any expression. Her eyes stalked me with the terror of a child lost in the dark, until the lights went green and I realised that for her, I was only a ghost. I often think that in rural Ireland, ghosts relied too much on Wilkie Collins and Edgar Allan Poe to make their presence felt. In Leitrim, visitors from the other world invariably appeared after dusk, at the top of the stairs, in white lace dresses, or wearing top hats, walking behind carriages drawn by headless horses. Only once did I hear of a Leitrim ghost manifest in broad daylight, and that was a stag. A friend of mine was standing at the clothesline in the high hills and saw a giant elk on the far headland. It had majestic antlers, but in the time it took to peg a sheet to the line, which blocked my friend's view for just a second, the stag had moved. But in small towns, ghosts regularly manifest in broad daylight. In Mullingar, everyone is still haunted. It's just that the ghosts are not quite so exotic. They're more substantial. They may incubate as little flecks of fear in the labyrinth of the mind, but they manifest as ordinary people on the street. I've never been disturbed by clanking chains, creaking doors, or the chanting of pot-bellied monks waddling around the attic. Fortunately, electricity has killed off those exotic possibilities. And yet, the other world is disturbingly close. The other world is a deprived housing estate, or a mean street, where garbage lies uncollected, a cul-de-sac of poverty, a place where people in jeeps don't stop for tea, Yes, the other world is a real place. It's a ghostly realm also. Come to think of it, most towns have a hill or a half acre or a white city where the poor have been corralled for generations. And just as film stars and pop idols constitute the ordered pantheon of our secular gods, so the poor have become the unruly ghosts of an affluent society. There is an old man I keep meeting in unlikely places. He has weak eyes, falling eyelids, and shaking hands. Last week I saw him in Tesco's, stranded in the electrical section, surrounded by flat TV screens, smoothie makers, and juicers. I pointed him back towards the tinned sardines. He moved slowly with his purse in one hand and his list of messages in the other. There was something about his slow trajectory up the aisle which reminded me of a Shinto master. He scoured the shelves for the precise tuna he wanted. "I have to go to the post office afterwards," he said to me, "to get me pension." Later that afternoon I spotted him at counter number 7 collecting his money. His movements were cautious, the purse still in his hand and the Tesco bag on his arm. "How are you?" I asked. He looked at me perplexed. "I met you this morning," I said. He didn't remember. He stared into my face for a minute and said, "I have to go home now." When I had posted my letter, I scanned the street, expecting to see him again. In the slanting afternoon sun, mooching along or clinging to the wall, but there was no sign of him. Maybe he was a Japanese Shinto master, or my father's ghost, making a brief appearance. But like the stag, he had vanished. I suppose what I'm getting at there is this thing of faith. You know, we talk about religious faith. The faculty to believe, to imagine, to perceive in certain ways that don't correspond with empirical reality around us, that ability is in us. We're doing it all the time. Who knows from that man's point of view? He was meeting a ghost. I to him was a ghost. I pointed him towards the sardines. But in the afternoon he didn't recognize me. The figure that met him and pointed him to the sardines had vanished. He didn't know him anymore. And when I saw the young girl sitting in the truck, because the truck was just stopped for a moment at the zebra crossing, and I'm looking up at her and I'm thinking, like, she's just a figure passing through my cosmos. And then I thought, maybe I'm that to her too. And then finally, when I see that old man, and I go looking for him, and he's not there. Where did he go? Where is he now? What did I see? Maybe I saw the ghost of my father. In a way, he is that. Because in a way, every time I look out, I'm in a kind of a dream. Every time I look in, I wake up. And the women on the feast of Nullag Naman, They were enjoying the fact that slipping into that numinous world, that world where you begin to see everything around you like in a dream, where the hard edges of empirical reality begin to blur, soften, and then blur, finally end up in a fog, and you feel you're just watching things move in a dream, like that journey towards that. It brings you to a deeper sense of embodiment. It's like you've broken down the door between this empirical world and the imaginal realm. So I am here in my studio, and empirically I can use my eyes and look at the hard edges of the stereo system and the lighting and the clock. And I can say this is a real world. I know it. It's a clear surface. It's a hard surface. I bang the desk and I can feel my knuckle.